They asked us to pay $250K for their sick kid, but we said no, and the family imploded. They called us monsters. In a family group chat, in front of everyone, complete with a Facebook post for the general public to weigh in on. All because we said no to handing over $250,000. And before you even think about taking their side, you need to hear the full picture, because this situation is so much more layered than a sick kid and two people who refuse to help. Let me set the scene properly, because context is everything here. My husband comes from a big, loud, messy family. The kind where everyone knows everyone else's business and nobody ever stays out of anything. There are group chats for every occasion, phone calls that spiral into hours, and an unspoken rule that loyalty means involving yourself in things that are frankly none of your concern. Holidays are loud. Weddings turn into productions. Even minor disagreements get amplified into family-wide events because nobody has ever learned to let anything be small. I have learned over the years to keep my distance from the drama. I let him handle his side, I stay in my lane, and we live our life quietly. We have built something stable and good, and the way we protect that is by not letting other people's chaos become our chaos. But this time they pulled me right into the middle of it, and once I was in, there was no going back. Now there is one particular cousin in this family who is married to a man I am going to be very honest about. He is not a good person. He makes those lazy gay jokes that he thinks are harmless but are really just a constant low-level form of disrespect. The kind of person who delivers an insult with a grin and then acts wounded when you do not laugh along. He has a way of being unpleasant that he has carefully constructed to stay just inside the line of deniability. He has never hidden the fact that he resents how well my husband and I have done for ourselves. We do not flash it around. No expensive cars, no social media posts about exotic vacations, no lifestyle that screams money. We are intentional about that because we know how it can land and we genuinely do not feel the need to perform our success for anyone. But the family knows, and he has always had a problem with it. He has always looked at us with that particular brand of contempt that people reserve for those they feel have gotten more than their fair share. This is a man who very loudly celebrated inheriting a house worth $750,000, a house that is now paid off and sitting in his name. He told anyone who would listen about that inheritance. He made a whole event of announcing it. He wanted everyone to know exactly what he had, and he made absolutely sure they did. So when I tell you that this couple lives well beyond their means, I want you to understand I am not being judgmental about people who struggle financially. I am talking about a deliberate and sustained choice to prioritize appearances over stability. Nice cars on finance. Luxury holidays that they book twice a year without hesitation. Designer purchases that get mentioned in conversation just enough to register. Dinners at restaurants that cost more per person than most people spend on groceries for a week. An estimated $80,000 in debt despite an income of around $100,000 a year. These are not the choices of people who have fallen on hard times through no fault of their own. These are the choices of people who have decided, consistently and repeatedly, that looking a certain way matters more than being financially secure. And for a long time that was their business and not ours. People can spend their money however they like. That is not my concern until the moment it becomes my concern. Then their 8-year-old son got sick. And I want to be clear that I am not minimizing that. A child becoming seriously ill is a genuinely terrible thing. There is a helplessness that comes with watching a kid go through something painful and frightening, and no matter how I feel about his parents, I feel nothing but compassion for him. He is a little boy who did not choose any of this, who does not understand the financial arguments happening around him, and who deserves for the adults in his life to do right by him. He is not going to die, but his life is going to be more difficult, and that is heartbreaking. There is a treatment available that could potentially help him, something that might give him a better quality of life than he would otherwise have. It costs around $250,000. And they came to us and asked us to pay for it. We did not say no on the spot. We told them we needed to discuss it, which was the honest and respectful thing to do. We did not want to react emotionally in either direction. My husband and I sat down and had a real conversation about it, the kind of conversation where you put everything on the table and look at it without flinching. We looked at the full picture. We thought about the child, about what his life might look like and how much this treatment could genuinely change things for him. We thought about what we were actually being asked to do, not just the number but everything behind it. We thought about the relationship, about the history between us and this man, about the years of low-level hostility and the way he had always treated our success as a personal offense. We thought about what it would mean to say yes and what it would mean to say no. We thought about what kind of precedent we would be setting and whether the people we were handing that kind of financial power to had done anything to deserve it. We sat with all of that and we took it seriously. And ultimately we called them back and told them that this was not something we were going to do. That phone call did not go well. He lost it. Completely lost it. Whatever composure he had been maintaining in the initial conversation evaporated instantly. The version of him that had always kept the hostility at a simmer suddenly boiled over entirely, and it was clear the rage had been sitting right beneath the surface the whole time, waiting. He called us every name he could think of. His voice went to a place that told me this was not just about the money and it was not just about his son. This was everything he had ever resented about us coming out at full volume because he finally had a reason he believed justified it. The entitlement was breathtaking. He did not ask why. He did not try to persuade us. He did not appeal to us emotionally or logically. He just erupted, as though our refusal was a personal attack on him rather than a reasonable answer to an enormous request. And then, because that was not enough, they went to the family group chat. They posted on Facebook. They made it a public event, a performance of outrage carefully constructed to maximize pressure and shame us into changing our minds. They framed it as us turning our backs on a suffering child, which was not accurate, and they knew it was not accurate, but accuracy was not the point. The point was audience. The point was volume. The point was making us feel so cornered and so judged that we would cave just to make it stop. And it worked, in the sense that the messages started flooding in immediately. Family members we barely hear from, people who have never once expressed interest in our lives or asked how we were doing, suddenly very passionate and very vocal about what we should do with our money. The notifications were relentless. This is where I decided I was done staying quiet. I sent a message to the group chat. I left a comment on the Facebook post. I was calm. I was specific. I chose every word deliberately because I knew anything emotional would be used against me and anything vague would be ignored. And I said what needed to be said. I asked a simple question. I asked why two people who own a fully paid-off house worth $750,000 were asking us to fund a medical treatment instead of using the asset they already have. Because you can release equity against a property. You can take out a mortgage on a house you own outright and access significant funds that way. The payment on that kind of mortgage would likely be less than what they were previously paying in rent before they inherited. The math is not complicated and I laid it out clearly so that anyone reading could follow it. They could fund the treatment, clear their existing debt, and still own the house. They would still have the asset. It is not a perfect situation, but it is a real and viable one that they had not even mentioned considering, because considering it would require them to sacrifice something. I also pointed out the two upcoming international holidays totaling around $20,000 that they had not canceled. I pointed out the cars still sitting in the driveway on their finance payments. I said what I genuinely felt, which is that agreeing to pay would not really be paying for a treatment. It would be paying to protect a lifestyle. It would be absorbing the financial consequences of years of deliberate choices so that nothing about the way they live has to change. And as parents, if your child needs something and you have a significant asset sitting there that can provide it, the answer is not to call someone else first. The answer is clear, and it starts with you. And honestly, that is the part that gets me the most. If they had come to us and said they had nothing, that they had tried everything, that they had already refinanced the house and sold what they could and downsized and cancelled every luxury and exhausted every resource they had access to, and it still was not enough, that conversation would have gone completely differently. We would have helped. That is not even a question in my mind. There would have been no hesitation. Watching someone exhaust every option they have and still fall short is a very different thing from watching someone skip every option they have and come straight to you expecting a check. The first scenario is someone in genuine crisis reaching out for support. The second scenario is someone who has decided their comfort matters more than their responsibility, and who expects others to fill the gap their choices created. And what happened here was the second scenario, without question or hesitation or a single conversation about what they might be willing to give up first. Now here is what happened after I said all of that publicly. The family started shifting. People who had initially been furious with us started looking at the numbers and realizing that what we were saying made sense. The house worth $750,000. The holidays still booked. The debt untouched. The fact that no sacrifices had been made or even proposed before they came to us. And some of the people who had already promised to contribute to the treatment started quietly pulling their contributions back, because they had done their own thinking and come to the same conclusion we had. Which led to a whole new wave of name-calling, this time directed at everyone who stepped back, not just us. Okay, pause. They posted this on Facebook. They took a private financial disagreement and deliberately placed it in front of their entire social network for the internet to weigh in on. They chose to make this public. They invited the court of public opinion into their living room and handed everyone a microphone. And now they are upset that information came out in that public space, and that people, once they had the full picture, did not unanimously agree with them. You cannot open a door and then be angry at what walks through it. You do not get to control the narrative after you have handed it to everyone you know. The question being asked here is whether we are terrible people for not paying. And I think the honest answer is no, and here is why I feel so strongly about that. Wealth does not come with an obligation to fund other people's choices. Having money does not mean you owe it to people who have decided not to help themselves first. If we had stepped in and written that check, the holidays would have stayed booked. The cars would have stayed in the driveway. The debt would have sat there untouched. And the next time something came up, we would have been the first call again, because that is how it works with people like this. The generosity becomes the baseline. The help becomes the expectation. And before long you are not a person to them anymore, you are a resource. You are a number they call when the situation requires it. There is something deeply uncomfortable about a person who has spent years being openly dismissive of you, who has made snide comments about your success and treated your relationship as something beneath him, being the same person who then expects you to reach into your finances and hand over $250,000 without question. It is not lost on me that this man never once came to us with warmth or gratitude or basic human decency. And the first time he needed something enormous he came knocking as though all of that history simply did not exist. He did not come humbly. He did not come with any acknowledgement of what had passed between us over all those years. He came with an expectation, enormous in size and completely unearned, and when that expectation was not met he treated it as a declaration of war. The child deserves help. Nobody is disputing that, and I want to be clear about it again because it matters. But the child has parents who own a significant and valuable asset. Who have access to untouched financial resources. Who have made an active and visible choice to frame this as everyone else's responsibility before examining their own. And that is the part one cannot get past. That is the part that made our answer no. And given everything that followed, given who these people revealed themselves to be under pressure, I am not second-guessing that answer for a single second. The family can call us monsters if they want. People who have the full picture, who understand what these people actually have access to and what they have chosen not to do, are not calling us monsters anymore. And that tells me everything I need to know about whether we made the right call. My mom called me a psychopath for wanting a brother but told her friend it was normal, so I asked why. She called her own son a psychopath. He was a little kid who cried because he wanted someone to play with. And then she looked at her friend's daughter, a little girl upset for the exact same reason, and told her it was completely normal and everything was going to be okay. Let that sit for a second before we go any further. This is a 16-year-old who has spent his entire childhood being told that something was fundamentally wrong with him for having a completely human feeling. He grew up as the only boy in a family with 5 sisters, and from the very beginning he was taught that boys and girls exist in completely separate worlds. Video games are for boys. Swimming for fun is for girls. Hiking is for boys. Dolls and makeup are for girls. These are the rules his parents laid down, apparently with great conviction, and they enforced them strictly enough that this kid grew up without any real common ground with his own siblings. Think about what that actually looks like in practice, day after day, year after year. 5 sisters in the same house and not a single shared interest that anyone was allowed to build on together. No one teaching them how to meet in the middle. No one saying that maybe the lines did not have to be so absolute. Just rules, and silence, and a boy growing up feeling like a stranger in his own home, watching his sisters form their own small world and knowing, without anyone having to say it out loud, that he was not welcome in it. And the worst part is that it did not have to be that way. It was a choice the parents made every single day and renewed every time they drew another line between their children. And then, after all of that, his parents turned around and blamed him for it. Think about that for a moment. They created the division. They drew every line. They told him wrestling and video games were not for girls. They told his sisters the same thing in reverse. They built a household where the kids were practically raised in parallel, never really intersecting, never given the tools to connect. And then when the relationships between these children are strained and distant, the parents point at the boy and say the damage started with him. They trace it all the way back to a little kid crying because he found out he was getting a sister instead of a brother. That is the origin story they chose for his failures as a sibling. Not their rigid enforcement of gendered rules. Not their refusal to create any real shared space between their children. Just a little boy, crying, which they decided was proof that he was the problem. As if grief about unmet belonging is a character defect rather than one of the most universal feelings a child can have. As if wanting connection and then mourning the absence of it is something to be ashamed of rather than gently tended to. And the word they chose to describe a child having that feeling was psychopath. Not disappointed. Not a little sad. Not going through something hard. Psychopath. Used more than once. Used as the years went on and the frustration continued. That word was applied to a child who wanted a brother to play with, and then repeated to a teenager who still did not perform the closeness with his sisters that his parents demanded despite having actively prevented it from developing. That word did not disappear the way a careless comment might. It settled into him, the way only a parent's words can, because you are wired from birth to believe that the people who raised you have access to some truth about you that you yourself cannot see. You start to wonder if maybe they are right. You start to watch yourself for signs of it. You carry the word into every room, every friendship, every moment where you feel something deeply and then immediately question whether you are allowed to. And that is an unbearable thing to do to a child who has done nothing wrong except feel exactly what any child would feel. Here is where it gets genuinely hard to stomach. A woman comes over. She is a friend of the mom. She has a daughter who is upset because she is getting another brother instead of a sister. And the mom, this same woman, does not hesitate for a single second. She sits down with this little girl and she is warm and she is kind and she tells her it is completely okay to feel sad. She validates the feeling. She reassures the child. She says it will all be fine. Picture the scene for a moment. The same house. The same woman. Probably the same soft voice she uses when she wants to seem nurturing. And she is pouring genuine tenderness into a child she does not even know. A child whose only offense was wanting a sibling who looked like her, the same offense her own son committed years earlier and was called a psychopath for. She is exactly the parent you would want in that moment, except she already had that moment, with her own child, and she made a completely different choice. Hold on. She drove the empathy to a stranger's kid that she refused to give to her own son for years. Let me take a breath here. When the friend and her kids leave, this 16-year-old does something that takes real clarity and real nerve. He asks his mom a direct question. He does not yell. He does not accuse. He just points at the obvious and asks why the same feeling gets two completely different responses depending on whether the child is a boy or a girl. Sit with how much composure that actually requires. He just watched his mother be everything he needed and never got, for someone else's child, in his own living room. He watched her kneel down and speak gently to a little girl the same way no one ever spoke to him. And instead of falling apart, instead of screaming, he just asks the question. Quietly. Clearly. He is 16 years old and he is handling this with more emotional maturity than the adults around him have shown him in his entire life. That is not a gotcha question. That is not being intentionally naive. That is a kid who has been told he was broken for years finally holding up a mirror. And what happens? She yells. She runs to tell his dad. His dad yells. They tell him he is being naive and that he should be a better man by now. Not a better person. A better man. Because even in the moment where they are caught in a clear and obvious double standard, the response is to reach for the language of masculine performance and tell him he is failing at it. There is no pause. No moment of reflection. No acknowledgement that the question had any merit at all. No one in that house stops to consider that maybe the boy just asked something worth answering honestly. Instead, the volume goes up, the blame shifts back to him, and once again the entire machinery of their parenting exists to make sure he never trusts his own perception. He asked a fair question and they responded by doubling down on the same playbook they have been running his entire life. This family raised this boy with rigid gender rules so strict that he did not have a real relationship with his sisters, then blamed him for the distance, then called him a psychopath for a normal childhood emotion, then demonstrated in real time that they never actually believed that emotion was wrong, just that it was wrong for him specifically, and then yelled at him when he noticed. That is the full sequence. Read it again if you need to. The term psychopath is not a casual word. It describes a clinical condition involving a fundamental absence of empathy and conscience. Applying that label to your child for crying about a sibling preference is not just wrong. It is damaging. It plants something in a child that does not leave easily. It tells him that his feelings are not just inconvenient, they are evidence of something dark inside him. Imagine carrying that from when you were small enough that you needed your feelings explained to you, carrying it all the way to 16, and then watching your mother gently comfort a stranger's child for the exact same thing. That is not just a contradiction. That is a confirmation of something he has probably suspected for a long time, quietly, without the language to name it. That the rules were never really about emotions at all. They were always about him specifically. About keeping him small. About making sure he never felt entitled to the same grace that everyone else around him was freely given. And now he finally has proof. Not a feeling. Not a suspicion. Proof, witnessed with his own eyes, in his own living room, on an ordinary afternoon. Now I want to address the parents directly, even knowing they will never hear this. What you did was not discipline. It was not preparing your son for the realities of life or teaching him to be a man. What you did was tell a child that his normal human disappointment was a moral failing, enforce it with a clinical insult, and then demonstrate through your own behavior that you never believed it. You owe him an apology he will probably never receive, and that silence will be its own kind of answer to every question he has ever asked about why he was treated differently. You created the exact distance you are blaming him for, and you have spent years making him feel like the source of a wound you inflicted. That is not parenting. That is something else entirely. This kid is not a psychopath. He never was. He was a boy who wanted someone to play football with and climb trees with and talk about video games with, and he was born into a family that made sure he never got that, and then punished him for grieving it. He is 16 now and he is asking the right questions. I hope he keeps asking them. I hope he finds people in his life who treat his feelings like they matter, because he deserves that, and he clearly was not getting it at home. He is 100% not the problem here. Not even close. Drop a comment telling me which story hit harder for you, and if you are riding with this channel, a like and a subscribe genuinely means a lot.